In this video, we're going to apply some of our form modeling tools to create some wireless earbuds. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video, we're going to apply some of our form skills. Now, I know this Forms Mastery series has sort of gone on, and there's not really a goal. We just kind of cover a few things here and there. We do some detail work, like we did our helmet series a while ago, where we talked about starting a complex shape. But I thought that an earbud is something that, and these things are everywhere, of course, and they're all different shapes and sizes, but I thought it was a good opportunity to talk about some of the best practices when modeling with the Forms tools. So you can apply this to anything you want, but generally what we're going to do is just create an earbud shape. So we're going to get started in a new design. We're going to create a form, and for this one, I'm going to use a cylinder. So I'm just going to select a plane and draw a cylinder. I don't really care about the size. I'm not worried too much about scale. Now, something I've noticed recently that has not been fixed is when you create a new cylinder, the diameter faces come in at 3 by default, which is not right, and the preview doesn't show that either. And what I want to do is I want to use a higher number, something like 16, especially when I want a lot of detail. We have to be real careful when we're modeling with something like this, but 16 is going to give us a good bit of resolution. Next, you'll notice that the height faces by default is coming in at 1, but what we see on the screen is 4. As soon as we click this up to 2, you can see that it actually does show 2 faces. So what we want in this case is 1. So we're going to start with 1 height face and 16 diameter faces with no symmetry. So I always like to start by modeling in box display, so that's Alt and 1 on the keyboard. You can also go to Utilities and Display Mode and find out what the shortcut keys are for you. If you're on a Mac, I believe it's going to be Option and 1, but you can double check that. So now that we have this sort of starting shape, what we're going to do is we're going to begin to turn it or transition it into our earbud. So the first thing I'm going to do is double click this side, and I'm going to go to Edit Form. Now what I want to do is I want to scale this down a bit, so I want to make sure that I keep everything consistent. And by default, the quadrant or the coordinate system is going to be based on the center point of all of our selections. So all I have to do is grab this and I can start scaling it down in plane. I'm going to go ahead and view it from the side and just see what it looks like. Everything looks good there, so now I can extrude out another section. So I'm going to hold down Alt and just simply pull this back straight. And then once more, I'm going to rotate around and I'm going to scale this down. I'm going to go back to the side, and this is going to be sort of the standard workflow. Now, I have noticed another issue with the recent update of Fusion is if you have a dialog box active and you try to use Alt and 1 or Alt and 3 on the screen, in order to go back and forth between box and smooth display, it doesn't work, so you have to click and deselect for right now, at least until they update and fix that. So one thing you'll notice is as we go back and forth between box and smooth display, that edge moves. It's in a different location. And one thing we can do to sort of work on that or fix that is go to Utilities and Make Uniform. This is something that you end up doing kind of often. And what ends up happening is it's going to take a look at the difference between the smooth display and the box display, and it's going to try to average that out. For right now, we're going to go back to box display and continue to add some more geometry. So in Edit Form, what I want to do is I'm going to add just a small amount of detail here. I'm going to go to a side view. I'm going to hold down Alt, and I'm going to scale this down. I am not going to fill this in the Forms environment. It's actually going to work a little bit better as a surface, but I am going to pull it back just slightly. And once again, we can go to Smooth Display. If you like working in the intermediate display, you can actually see the control cage, the box, and the underlying smooth surface. I like to just jump back and forth between both using my shortcut keys. Also, Control and 4 will hide the edges, and that's Command if you're on a Mac, and Control or Command and 6 will bring them back. So you can kind of see what we're working with here, and that's going to be pretty common when you're working in Forms, is to be able to jump back and forth between those a lot. Okay, so now that we have this basic shape, this is going to be sort of the outside section, and what I want to do is I want to take this edge, and I'm going to hold down Shift and select this, and I want to turn this into more of a triangle. Now, this is a kind of a tricky thing for us to do, and we have to think about the scale tool and how this is going to work. So if I just scale horizontally in the X direction, it's going to turn this into more of an oval. And then what I want to do after that is I want to reset my pivot point. I'm going to put it right in the middle here. The reason is because I've got two edges selected. Now I want to scale it vertically and just sort of pull that up, and then I'm going to click away. So all we've done is we've just adjusted that from a true cylinder and made it more of a squish shape. And you can see here we've just sort of transitioned that a little bit. All right, so this is the outside section, typically where the battery and the little circuit would be for Bluetooth connection. And that's going to be kind of where we leave that. But now we need to taper this down and get to the earbud portion. So I'm going to double click that edge, go again to my side view, and I'm going to hold down Alt. Now, one thing, if you've followed along with any of the other videos, is I always say in box display mode, when we're adding edges or we're extruding, if you have a completely straight section, then it's not doing you any good. So we want to make sure that we avoid having straights. And what I mean by that is if I hold down Alt and extrude this again, this edge here is not doing me any good, and it's actually causing more trouble. So keep in mind that when we have three edges like this, if it's completely straight between them, that's going to be problematic for geometry. But with that third edge, what we're going to do is we're going to scale it down. All right, so again, we're starting to make the shape. I'm going to check the smooth display. That looks okay. And we are going to control the edges here a bit more. But what I want to do is I want to begin to scale this down. So I'm going to scale it down a bit more. And I'm actually going to transition this over to the right-hand side in just a second. So hold down Alt. We're going to extrude again. This time we're going to rotate around. And I want to pull this to the side, but you'll notice what's happening is the rest of the geometry underneath is staying. And really what we want to do is we want to pull all of that. So I'm going to Shift, double click that, and I'm just going to pull both of those over. And then I want to take this edge, and again, we don't want it to be straight, so I'm going to scale it down a little bit. And then I want to take a look at this in smooth display to kind of see where we're going. Now, everything looks okay so far. We're going to do a little bit more work on this, back to box display. And again, what we want to do is we want to sort of scale this down and start to build out the earbud portion. So I'm going to hold down Alt to extrude. I'm going to rotate this around. I'm going to scale it sort of way down. So make sure that we scale that way down. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a back view. I'm going to hold down Alt and Control, and again, Command and Option on a Mac, and I'm going to scale this out. So what we're doing now, holding down both of those, is we're extruding with a creased edge. So this keeps a creased edge here. If we go to smooth display, you can see that creased edge stays there. So this is a great way for us to transition the shape. We can always play around with these edges. We can delete them, we can add more, but for right now, it's going to be okay. And then I'm going to double click this, and we will just hold down Alt and extrude this out, let go, do it one more time, and rotate around, scale this down. And then hold down Alt and scale it inward. And again, we'll sort of fill that shape in afterwards. All right, so I'm going to go back to box display and just take a look at this general shape. Now, if I want to make any drastic changes, so for example, if I want to move all of this, what I can do is I can select it all and just sort of push it around and see what it looks like. And if we want to add any more detail, so for example, if I don't like the way that this edge is looking, I can double click this edge and I can delete it and just see what the transition looks like without it. Then I can come in and I can use Modify and Insert Edge. When we use the simple insertion mode, remember it's going to put it right where we say, and it's going to have an impact on the geometry. If we use Exact, it's going to put it approximately in the right spot, but it's going to do it in a manner that does not affect the current shape. Now in this case, we're going to be adjusting the shape, so it doesn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and take that and scale it down. I always like to work either in a single direction or in plane, and that's going to be important for us, working in plane or in a single direction. And then I want to take this and just move it back a little bit. I want to get a little bit closer to a more minimalistic shape. That looks okay. All right, so now that we got the general shape, now is the time for us to add a bit of detail, because right now this thing is just a rounded blob. And while that might be okay, we want to add a little bit more character or style to it. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to use Insert Edge. I'm going to start here, and I'm going to put an edge relatively close to it. That's going to tighten that up. But remember I said that we don't want to put anything that's completely flat. And so if we look at this, that edge is inserted and it's completely flat here. So I want to make sure to scale that out at least a little bit. So come to our back view, find the scale, and I'm just going to use a manual entry of 1.01. And we want to make sure that on this side it doesn't go too far to create a problem. Everything looks okay. Smooth display, Control and 4 to get rid of my edges. Now you can see that we've got a little bit tighter transition there. So we're going to repeat this process to add a bit more detail back here, and select that edge. We're going to go to Insert Edge, and there's not really a specific number that we need to hit. It kind of depends on how much distance is between other edges, but you can kind of play around with that. Again, I'm going to go to my box display. You can see it's put this in as sort of a flat. So what I'm going to do is select that first outer edge, go to Modify, and I'm just going to move this a small amount, let's say 0.25 millimeters, and then take a look at this in Smooth Display. Control and 4 to get rid of my edges, and you can see that looks pretty good. I think overall the size is a bit too big, and again, we can work with this. We can make changes whenever we want. I'm going to box select this. I'm just going to pull this back, change its size and shape a little bit, and just kind of, play around with the shape and see what works. Control and 4 to get rid of the edges, see what this looks like. I think I want to tighten this edge up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is insert another edge. Before I do that, this is a great time for me to go back to Make Uniform, just to make sure there are no drastic changes between the two. And always double check this box display. You can see how this is sort of going underneath. I don't really like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this edge in box display. I'm going to pull this back, and then I'm going to insert another edge. And that other edge that we add, I'm going to put it on this side here. That's going to help us control that transition. I'm going to go to Smooth Display, going to go to Modify, and again, we're just going to do a general scale. I'm going to do 0.99. And Control and 4 to get rid of my edges. So you can see that transition is quite a bit tighter than the one over here. That might be okay depending on the style of the design that you're looking to do. If you want to tighten this side up as well, we can do that by manually moving those edges a bit closer together. You'll notice that in Smooth Display, these are pretty far apart. In Box Display, they're pretty close together. They're obviously much closer together here. So what we can do is we can insert another edge, or we can use Modify and Slide Edge and just try to get that edge a little bit closer. Double check our Smooth Display. I'm going to go back into Make Uniform just to double check and make sure that everything's as close as it can be. And if it's still not tight enough, then you can play around with inserting additional edges. And there are a couple of different ways that we can do this. I know usually I use Insert Edge with a design like this where we're trying to use some sort of symmetry even without symmetry. Using Insert Edge as opposed to Insert Point is a better option. We also have the available option to use Bevel Edge. Now there are some nuances or differences here. If I double click this and use Bevel Edge, what ends up happening is we can control the number of edges that we're inserting, and we can control how close those are. So if we put them at, say, 0.1, and I say OK, what ends up happening here is it's going to add a bunch of edges in line, and you can see they're right here. If we go to Box Display, you can see they're all right here, but they're all flat. Now, that's something that we generally want to avoid. So this works well if you have a crease and you're using the bevel, but on a smooth display like this, it's really not a good option. So if you want something a bit tighter, I suggest either adding another edge in here. So we're going to insert an edge. And then what I want to do again is I want to scale that up just slightly. We don't want anything flat because it's not going to do anything for us. So this is going to be 1.01. And if it's scaled up too much, You can see that's a little bit too much. I'll view it from the side to make sure it's easy to see. You can see it's scaled up a little bit too much. What I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it up half of that. So 1.01 was a bit too much, so I'll select the correct direction, and I'll do 1.005, and then double check our smooth display. So now you can see that's a bit tighter. If it's too tight, and again, that does happen, then this is a little bit easier. We can take this edge and we can use slide edge, find where the control is, and just sort of pull it away and soften that corner up. We can do the same thing with this one. Just modify slide edge and just sort of pull it the other direction, kind of pull it away until you're happy with the results. So that looks pretty good. Control and 4. And it looks like we've got a really consistent shape. We could probably work on this a little bit. So let's spend a little time here and let's talk about what we can do to that. So a lot of times you'll have a sort of a bump out that happens here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this edge. I'm going to move my pivot point over here. And then I'm going to scale this out. I'm going to scale this out this direction. Now, as this is happening, what we're doing is we're getting this bump. So you can see as we pull it, it's pulling back this way. As we scale it out, it's moving relative to the position of my pivot point. So that's important. And this is also true if I start to rotate it. So for example, a lot of times on these earbuds, you'll see that they sort of maximize the amount of space they're using inside for things like a little battery, or potentially some extra area for the Bluetooth chips or whatever they need, because these things are relatively small. So again, that pivot point is critical because we don't want to affect the shape over here, but we can rotate this around and we can modify the scale, push it in and out until we're happy with the shape. It's always a good idea to hide the edges as well, just to kind of get a look. So that looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the results so far. There's a couple other things that I want to do before I okay this. First is I want to take a look at curvature map analysis. Now, recently I did a video that mentioned that the Gaussian method is not really very beneficial. This is one of the times when it actually is beneficial. So with a design like this, where we're really focusing on keeping that cylindrical shape, and we're sort of working our way around it, it can be really helpful to see the transitions. We can see that we've got a higher radius of curvature over here. We can change this to banded, which will kind of give you a bigger change in color, so you can identify those areas more. And we can see that we've got a radius of curvature that's cool over here, which means that we're going from positive to negative back to positive. And it's not happening over here. And that's really just because we rotated that section. We can bring our edges back if we want to see that. So if this is a problem in terms of the overall shape or aesthetic, then you can use this to sort of work on it. As is one of those cases also where the principal maximum is still beneficial. We can see the same thing. We've got this sort of extra radius here. And that's okay. You can play around with this and you can figure out when these different color bands show up and what that radius value is. And that looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Could probably work a little bit here, but again, we didn't keep it fully cylindrical. We changed the shape a little bit, so that's okay. So I think I'm going to leave it on the Gaussian and say okay. I'm going to hide that, and then I'm going to finish the form. Now, I did mention that I wanted to finish these off with surfacing tools, and the main reason is because filling in a face like this, you're going to have a degenerate point at the center, and that's going to cause problems. And actually, while we're here, let's go ahead and let's fill it in so you can see that. Sometimes it's hard to identify this, but if we fill this in, we can use the collapse method with weld vertices at the center. We can say okay. And when we finish the form and convert this back to a surface, if I hide the edges and rotate this around, you can see that right there. And if I show the analysis, you can see exactly what's going on with those colors. So this is obviously a problem. That's not good curvature there. So I'm going to just do Control Z till we get back. And then we're going to use our surface tools, patch, and we're going to use curvature continuity. And we're going to try the analysis again. The analysis is missing that face because they're not stitched together. They're not included. And if we include them, then we're going to need to make a new analysis just simply by the nature of how that works. But you can see that this is a much different result. That surface that we created, it starts right here. And you can see that the colors transition across that edge, which means that we've got the curvature continuity going across that edge. And of course it's changing because it's a little bit of a dome here just based on the way the shape was. So that's a good reason why you would want to use surfaces after the fact rather than use the form fill. Another thing that we can do here is we can use things like our ruled surface. We can select this and we can pull that cone in a little bit, and then we can fill it on the inside and we can just stitch all this together. And what that ends up doing is it ends up building this as a solid body. So we no longer have a surface, now we have a solid body that we can then shell, make a thin wall plastic, figure out where to divide it up, and turn this thing into an actual product, something that we are going to use and generate tooling off of. But that's the overall process of using these form tools to build out something like this. And some of the key takeaways is to always remember that you want to make use of moving the pivot point, scaling, staying in plane, and not trying to drastically alter a single vertex or a single edge or a single face. If you want to kind of work globally on these designs, and you'll get a much more consistent result out of it after the fact. And always remember that you can select and delete edges. You don't have to stick with everything you've done. You can always take a step back, remove faces, remove edges, and then go back and add them again. When you're adding extrudes or when you're inserting edges, always remember that you don't want them to be straight. So if you've got 3 sets of edges, you don't want them to all be in line straight because the curvature is going to be bad. It's going to produce poor geometry. So you always want to make sure that you do have a little bit of variation in the height if you are adding edges, even if it's just to get a crease on the side of the part. All right, so at this point, that's going to be as far as we take this. I didn't really have an image or something to go by. It was just sort of a general process, a general shape. But if you give this a shot and you have any trouble, obviously, please let me know. Leave a comment in the video. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.